Hello, Miss Munson. This is my presentation over race, and I apologize for no video quality because my front video quality screen on my Chromebook is all messed up. But let's dive right into this, shall we? Um, my my first slide is the historical context. Now, the movie Race, in my opinion, which I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the movie overall. I feel like it was a great representation of Jesse Owens, especially in this time period. But the movie Race is set in the 20th century, United States, which was at the time just in such a dark place of segregation and racism in the United States. It really didn't support its founding message of equality for all, and so it had this huge amount of segregation with its people, and a lot of people like Jesse Owens really felt that, even though he was in more progressive area of the United States, he still felt the segregation because uh, many colleges at the time didn't accept many college sports didn't accept African American athletes into their programs. So around this time, he gets accepted in 1935. But with this and with many other athletes, as I found in some of my research, many other athletes who are African American or even just people of color, at the time when they got accepted into colleges, which was started around this time, or when they participated in sporting events, like some boxers participated, race riots started to break out. And so all this segregation and racism was happening, and Jesse Owens, who gets accepted to Ohio State for track and field in 1935, huge deal. People find out about it, and a lot of people don't like it. And a lot of Jesse Owens' first track meets were crowded in a thick fog of racism, where they'd be booing him when he'd go to line up at the start line or when he would go participate in the long jump. So during this time, though, also in Europe, there was a great deal of racism in Germany. Actually, all over Europe, there was a great amount of sorry, a great deal of anti-Jewishness, and a lot of people had a lot of hatred in Europe at the time. There was a lot of they were all scared because after World War I, they're trying to put the blame on someone, and a lot of that pre-existing racism just comes into light. And this comes in the form of Nazism, which happens in Germany around 1933, where Hitler is able to take control over Germany and express his ideals through propaganda and other methods. Now, the rise of this Nazism and racism and kind of dictatorship and in Germany causes the United States to start to look back at itself. Especially, you can see this with the American Committee for the Olympics. When they're debating on whether or not they should go to the Olympics, this is a big issue. Is that Nazism has that they wanted to make it where no one of color or Jewish descent could come to the Olympics and participate. And so the United States had a rival with that and look at themselves for a moment and think, well, we kind of do that too, but maybe we should still not participate because of Nazism's whole ideology and their views. And so this becomes huge. So there's talk about boycotting and talk about all this. And this is all happening at the same time, right when Jesse Owens is going to run in 1936. This is also post World War I and pre World War II. So it's right in the midst of a great amount of tension. It's especially after the Roaring Twenties. It's in 1936. There's a lot of emotion, a lot of tension within the United States at the time and everywhere in the world. So Race, the actual movie, was released in 2016. Was released in February 19th of 2016. Is a sports documentary and it was rated PG-13. And it was a biopic, and it started a lot of famous actors. Stephen James, which is a Canadian actor who plays Jesse Owens, and then Jason. Sorry, I'm gonna butcher his last name, but Sudeikis. He was a performer in SNL. He was a big time comedian, but also just an overall big time actor. And there's also some other pretty big names on here, but overall, it was directed by Stephen Hawkins. And so the plot, though, is basically for a T towards what Jesse Owens' life was. It starts out with him getting accepted to Ohio State, him dealing with some of the troubles there in his first few meets, him meeting Snyder, which was his coach at the time. Then he becomes then he starts to win in meets. He practices with setting world records. And then he has some personal issues with his wife. He had to find jobs and working ways to be able to provide for them. The overall movie follows this a lot. They like to I feel like the movie tried to explore as many different little social things that were happening with Jesse at the time. They would include the fact that he cheats on his wife and then eventually goes to apologize, and then he has troubles with he has relationship issues with his dad. He has his own issues with race and how he sees himself as a figure in that. And so all these tiny little plot points come down to when he has to decide if he wants to go to the Olympics, because he is obviously one of the best runners in the world at this point, setting world records over and over again. And so he has to decide, should he boycott the Olympics or should he go and run? And it's a huge moment because the NAACP actually comes up and approaches him and talks about how they would like him to boycott because it would send a message that the world's fastest runner doesn't want to do it. But it like then comes to the conclusion that either way, him running, if he becomes victorious, it would be greater than him boycotting. So this is the whole overall theme of the movie, the plot, the whole thing that's setting up, and that's just kind of a quick preview of the movie. So here are some of the quotes. Someone says race isn't a bad film or biopic for that matter. It's a beautifully shot, informative, and has some fantastic actors helming it. However, that's exactly what you said. That I feel like expresses this movie is one of the. I feel like it's very detailed in their choices and in their decisions. The director uses a very good sense of the overall fear of Nazism at the time. Um, but then it's kind of just that. It's just that like it is a good biopic film. It is that kind of film that was being made in the 2010s about famous figures in the last 100 years, and it's like it was just kind of at the time when it was first received, just a generic biopic of Jesse Owens. People liked it, people didn't like it. But then my next quote is ultimately race isn't about race or specifically racing. It's about sportsmanship and the ability of sports to cut through personal prejudice of all sports. So I feel like then that goes into kind of the message and the meaning and the like overall theme of the movie. Is this movie, yes, indicates about racism and racing, but overall, it talks about how Jesse Owens is just overall a great sportsmanship and how he brings to light that sports shouldn't be about racism or about race or about trying to prove that you're better. It should be about the actual sport. I mean, it should be about running the race and not about political motive or anything else like that. It should be about racing. So then my whole video, which you can watch, is about changing history. How the this video clip is about how Jesse Owens is at the Olympics. Now this one, I use this clip because I feel like it expresses right here. Louis Long, who is a competitor to Jesse Owens in this clip, is actually shows a great deal of sportsmanship, and he's a German athlete. So it's very shocking within the movie and actually in real life. This is huge. This right here, them holding hands after Jesse beats the record, just proves that Louis Long wasn't really racist. He just loved his country. He just didn't believe in what there was kind of spewing out. So he was just showing that it's about the sport that more matters than anything. And I feel like this really sums up, and this is my favorite clip of the film. It really sums up the overall theme and just like it really puts to the home to like the overall pressure and like realness of the moments at the Olympics where it's like it's about sportsmanship and it shouldn't be about the fact that Jesse Owens is an African American or that Louis Long is a Nazi. It should be about the actual sport. So this is where I'd have my video clip for you to watch. This is this is my first one, and I call it real stuff. I feel like this. My first few points, I talk about the truths that they use, and then I'll go into some of the inaccuracies. So for my first one, it's about the NAACP talking about boycotting, and I talked about this previously. They really wanted to view this boycott, and the movie uses this beautifully. If they view this, that the boycott could very much help push the ideology for that Jesse Owens, one of the fastest runners in the world, isn't going to stand for Hitler's ideology. And I feel like the movie does a great way of intertwining this into the story because it's one of the biggest plot points. Jesse Owens has to deal with the factor that if he goes on a principle that he needs to win to prove something to Hitler and the Nazi regime. But if he doesn't go, what's it really going to do except prove to the Americans? So it's a more of a like double-edged sword. He has pros and cons on each side, and it really you can really see in the movie, and I mean even real life, the inner struggle that he faces, and it's very present and very. This is one of the biggest things that the movie could have done, and definitely one of the greatest things it does because it really helps emphasize Jesse's views. So the next one is Larry Snyder, which was his coach. Was one of the biggest proponents of civil rights. He actually, in the movie, it even makes comment towards this. It says, "Oh, the Model T of of sports that he only need you can have any color as long as it's a racist remark by one of the other coaches, but it proves that he is one of the most has one of the most diverse teams in the states. He's an overall just great character, and they use this plot point because Landon Snyder is one of the first ones, and this helps Larry Snyder helps his career move forward. He becomes an Olympic coach, and he becomes one of the best Olympic coaches in the 60s and 50s and 70s. He is one of the best people that coaching you could ask for, and it's because he doesn't see it race. He sees it more as if in those 10 seconds you're running, you can push out the crowd and just run. You run the race. He's more about running, and he's more about centralizing as coaching. And the movie does a great job of emphasizing this. And I feel like that casting choice for this is honestly great because in the scene where he's trying to express that view to Jesse, he does the casting of shoot, I'm forgetting his name. The casting of Snyder was just done perfectly because it just he in Ted Lasso because he also plays a role in Ted Lasso. He expresses that beautifully, that coaching mentality, that expressing to your players and getting that connection. And so I feel like that casting for him was just overall great. The cinematography also does a great job with like centering him. They're talking, him and Jesse are talking, and there's a bunch of people yelling slurs at Jesse, and he does a great way of the cinematography does a great way of connecting with them two together, and making them like he's like you you gotta focus on the sport and not the people who are yelling at you. So my last fact is that there was a large deal of prejudice, but in 1936, and the movie even shows us, is that the crowd is screaming for Jesse. They loved him. The watching him perform, the movie does this, and it broadcasts him performing, and the people are just screaming his name, like they would be screaming for Hitler. And these are all German people who've all seen the propaganda that Hitler has disposed, and it really helps the movie because it really paints that these people they also love the sport, and they're not so blinded by Hitler's. Eventually, they will be, obviously later, but they're not so blinded right now by Hitler's propaganda. And it even expresses how Hitler just leaves. He gets so frustrated with this because he sees that it's a diminish to the Aryan race, and he's very like racist against this. And the movie does a beautiful job in expressing this. And overall, this is a great plot point to use. That it's like people care about the sport, and Hitler ideology has no standings, and it really just gets that division and that overall like presence that people do like Jesse, and they're not caring about his race; they're caring about how good of a performer and a good of an athlete he is, and so I feel like that's another good fact that I'd like to have in there. Starting to get into some of the small goofs. Now this is this one my first goof was that although at the start of the movie, right before Jesse gets to Ohio State and starts becoming a really prominent athlete in college, he takes a bus to get there. And in that bus scene, it makes it seem like the bus is segregated. Now, in Ohio at the time, is not one of the 19 or 14 states at the time that were segregated. It was a non-segregated, like it was it was obviously segregated by the people, but it wasn't segregated by law like in some of the Jim Crow South laws were. But even then, in the movie, it does a great job of like this. No matter where in the United States, still happens. So they obviously had to go sit in the back of the bus because of the racism at the time. But that most likely wouldn't have happened by law, as it was expressing in the film. But the film still uses that as a great way to express the overall racial tones that have been taking prominence in the United States, and so just a great scene to drive home the issues that Jesse faces. Um, Another tiny goof. These are just a few of my tiny goofs, but another one is that when Jesse comes into the stadium in Germany, there's a Hindenburg that is flying over, and so this Hindenburg though actually flew over 2 days prior to Jesse actually arriving in Berlin, which doesn't seem like a lot, but its overall use in the movie is very important because the cinematography uses this as like Nazis are dominating. It's really trying to set up that precedent that Germany is just overall overwhelming in its presence, and so it doing that, the movie really ties in a good amount of just like paranoia from the Nazis, and just like they're trying to express their big view of they're better and they're greater. And that's kind of what Hitler wanted at the time. So I feel like the movie does a great job expressing this, and then eventually uses it as a way to like go down. I think it's an overall like it's a tiny error, but this error still is like in play. But it's still an error that I feel like the casting or the cinematography did a great job at showing. So here are some of the bigger inaccuracies. Now they may not seem like it at first, but I'll like try and explain. So a big goof is that Hitler avoids Jesse in the after he sets the record in the 100-meter dash, and Jesse in real life actually comments. He says that he was never snubbed from Hitler, but he never actually met Hitler. Um, and now this was a common thing is where at every Olympics games the person who's hosting the government official like the president or the chancellor or whatever comes down and usually shakes hands with the winning athletes. Now at the time though, Hitler was told by a lot of the committees that were coming like you either congratulate all athletes including Jews and African Americans or Africans or any person who's not white, and Hitler was like, I don't want to do that. And then they're like, none at all. And so he chooses none. And so, no, actually, in reality, no athletes that weren't German, like from the German team, were actually introduced to Hitler. And so he does even go on to comment that he's apparently waved at Hitler and Hitler nodded back. And so there's like he never actually has to go and meet Hitler, but the movie expresses he does, and that he gets snubbed. And so this is a huge inaccuracy because the movie is trying to use this as a way to express that Hitler is like, I don't want to be around him. And now Hitler obviously had the ideology, but in real life, it was most likely that Hitler never really ever even cared. He just told everyone no because he was obviously racist against a lot of people who weren't white. And so at the time, definitely a big prominent thing that happened, but overall, it's still an inaccuracy in the film. Another big goof is when Snyder is reading a paper about the boycotting the Olympics and them deciding to go to the 1936 Olympics. It says that the posting date was sometime early in 1936, so like a month before the actual Olympics. And this is a problem because it's a continuity problem. This decision would have actually happened a year prior in 1935, and so as I took it was that they were doing this. Even it's a small error that you probably wouldn't see, but even then, the moment still feels like it's right before the Olympics. It still feels like this is a last minute decision in the movie, and I feel like they did this on purpose, especially how Snyder interacts because this and which again the actor of Jesse Owens in the film does a great job of expressing this. It's a huge decision on if he goes or not, if he is going to boycott it or if he will go and run. And so I feel like the time crunch really helps express that he has not that much time, even though in reality he probably had a year to make up his mind. But that moment, there, especially is there a fight between Snyder and Jesse, is like, why would you not go? You have an opportunity to prove something, and then Jesse's like, but you wouldn't understand because you're not African American. And so I feel like this is a great way to crunch I feel like the director did a great way to crunching the time, make it feel like it's really important. He makes his decision soon. Really makes it feel like it's going to happen soon. He has to decide. And so even though this is like a small error, I feel like the overall tone in this movie really expresses this opinion that it's really close, even though in reality it was a year apart. My last goof, now it's just a little fun one. Luz and Jesse, who become friends. Luz was obviously the German athlete who participated in long jump with Jesse. They eventually have a beer in Luz's room that he is staying in for the Olympics, and this moment. Luz is wearing some Nazi stuff like most athletes did, and his patch for the swastika symbol was actually backwards. So this is important to think about. If it's backwards, then that's obviously a clothing an error there. But in reality, I think it was more symbolic because of the fact that in that moment, Luz expressed to Jesse that he's not sure if he even trusts his government anymore. He loves his nation. He loves his people. He loves his overall environment, but he doesn't know if he trusts them on their racism and their overall tones towards Jewish people because he's seen some of the action that they are taking. He knows that his country is really racist at the time, and so he's scared and he's really wavering in his decision to stay in the country. And so even if this is a clothing error, I feel like this is really symbolic, and I feel like the cinematography does this a great job, and it really shows that it's like even if this is just a clothing error, it's still like something. It's still something that you can't be ignored. That he is obviously in this moment wavering, and so this tiny little error, even if it is tiny, is still something I feel like is huge to the overall theme and emotions in these scenes and these in this film. And then I think that's all I have. Some of the awards, though, were a lot of the Canadian awards for some of the best screens and visual effects in 2017. But actually, the person who plays Jesse Owens gets the Canadian Screen Award. And this is amazing because he is obviously Canadian, or he is Canadian from birth. Not to say it's obvious, but he is Canadian. And so it's very important that since he won this, I mean, he's winning basically something that's very important to him. And I mean, a lot of these awards are just overall just great. This film was, yeah, I loved it. I really enjoyed it. Being a track and field athlete myself, I thought it was really inspirational. Here are some of my sources I used. I will annotate them and explain it to them in that little bibliography. But yeah, that is should be all I have.